sandbox within the Pi app, it then loads the application in this window. And now you'll be able to not only see the application, but you'll also be able to interact with it. So we can sign in. You can see I'm signed in now, and then I can process a payment. And I'm not going to put my passphrase in here, but if we go through, then the payment will process. Cancel that. But now to go over a little bit of the functionality that Aurelian mentioned, and those authenticate functions and then the create payment functions. This is the demo app code, and you can come in and you can see how we've laid everything out, or as I said earlier, you can use it as a boilerplate. So the first step to integrating the SDK in any of your applications is going to be to plug in a few script tags into your index.html file. And so that's here, line 43, I'm going to highlight it, to 54. So the first script tag, which is here on line 44, this is the URL that connects to our SDK. And then you also have to call this Pi init function. And what the Pi init function does is that is going to tell us what version of the SDK do you want to connect to. This will make it backwards compatible should we make any updates to it in the future. And then also it has this sandbox flag. And the sandbox flag is what I just showed you in that when you when you set the sandbox Boolean to true, it is going to deploy into the sandbox mode, which means you can access it on your local environment. So very important that you plug those two script tags into your index.html file to get started. And then the other functions that come from the SDK, the first one here is the sign. In the application, it's called sign in. On our documentation, it's called authenticate or authentication. And so it has a few inputs. It has the scopes input, which you can kind of select the information that you want to get out of it. And then you plug it into the header, and it's going to have a callback function into it as well. And this callback function is what the incomplete payment found is part of the payment functionality, which I'll explain in just a minute. But you're going to call this authenticate function, and that's going to be what gets that access token, which gets you the user information. And so you can see here that we've added a few extra things into this original call. This is just to create the this is to sign the user into the application, but then also to display their username. But for base functionality, you just need these two lines here, which is what you're going to use to get that access token. And so once your user signed in, now you want to process a payment. There is a number of different payment functionality, but most of them are callback functions, the callback functions that we went over. But the way to create a payment is here on line 96. We've got the create payment, which is coming from the Pi SDK, and that takes two inputs. It takes the payment data and the callbacks. The payment data is things like amount. There's memo metadata, so you can add extra information to your payment. It's not limited to just having a Pi amount. You can add different things to it, whether it's, in the demo app instance, this is for ordering from the Pi bakery, or this is order number 1, 2, 3, 4. So you can add various things into the payment.
And if I may add something here, this is actually required, and this should or must be used in order to understand what this payment is about. If the only thing that's left is this metadata, this needs to enable recovering what this payment is about. So it could be an item ID, it could be an order ID, a cart ID. an NFT, an NFT ID that this user is about to buy. It can be pretty much anything, but it has to be able to, it has to enable recovering what this user was paying for. This is required, and that's why it is. It can be used to store any metadata we want, but most importantly, it must be used to enable recovering what this payment is for.
And so likewise, the callbacks are also required. The callbacks are what enables the process, the payment process, to move along. So as Aurelian was saying in the payment explanation, once you send this create payment function, then everything else is kind of handled asynchronously as it comes through. And so these callback functions are all the functionality to handle the various steps within the payment process. And you'll see here, they have very similar names to what was used. So on ready for server approval, this is that server side approval. This is that first part of creating a payment. Then we have on ready for server completion, which is the second part, which was the server side completion, payment completion functionality. And each callback function is defined just below on these parts here. And at a base level, what this is doing, this is telling your application what steps to complete when this callback is called, when this callback is made. And so it receives the information from the SDK. In this instance, it takes the information, so either the payment ID or the payment ID, the transaction ID, and it's sending that information to the back end of the application. And once the information is received on the back end, then that information is able to be sent and either approved or completed utilizing the Pi APIs. And I'm not going to go over how to implement the APIs in this step. They're laid out on our information online, but they are a REST API, which utilizing an API key, you can call the endpoint, pass in the information that is requested, and it'll complete that step of the transaction. And so this is all of the code on the front end required to process a transaction and integrate with the SDK.